Why so quiet?
Yeah, I would say this. Well, as I see it, although, I have read no reports internally or anything like that, but it looks to me like Wells made some big mistakes in what they incentivize. And as Charlie says, there's nothing like incentives, but they can incentivize the wrong behavior. And I've seen that a lot of places. And that clearly existed at Wells. The interesting thing is, to the extent that they set up fake accounts, a couple million of them that had no balance in them, that could not possibly have been profitable to Wells. So you can incentivize some crazy things. The problem is, I'm sure, is that, and I don't really have any insider information on it at all, but when you find a problem, you have to do something about it. And I think that's where they probably made a mistake at Wells Fargo. They made it at Solomon. I mean, John Goodfriend would never have played around with the government. He was the CEO of Solomon in 1991. He never would have done what the bond trader did, that played around with the rules that the federal government had about government bond bidding. But when he heard about it, he didn't immediately notify the Federal Reserve. And he heard about it in late April, and May 15th, the government bond auction came along, and Paul Moser did the same thing he'd done before and gamed the auction. And at this point, John Goodfriend, the destiny of Solomon was straight downhill from that point forward, because essentially he heard about a pyromaniac, and he let him keep the box of matches. And at Wells, my understanding, there was an article in the Los Angeles Times maybe a couple of years before the whole thing was exposed, and somebody ignored that article. And Charlie has beaten me over the head all the years at Berkshire, because we have 390,000 employees, and I will guarantee you that some of them are doing things that are wrong right now. There's no way to have a city of 390,000 people and not need a policeman or a court system. And some people don't follow the rules, and you can incentivize the wrong behavior. You've got to do something about it when it happens. Wells has become, Exhibit 1 in recent years, but go back a few years, you can almost go down. There's quite a list of banks where people behave badly, and where I would not say, I don't know the specifics at Wells, but I've actually written in the annual report that they talk about moral hazard if they allow people the shareholders of Wells have paid a price. The shareholders of Citicorp paid a price. The shareholders of Goldman Sachs, the shareholders of Bank of America, they paid billions and billions of dollars, and they didn't commit the acts. And of course, nobody did go. There were no jail sentences, and that is infuriating. But the lesson that was taught was not that the government bailed you out, because the government got its money back, but the shareholders of the various banks paid many, many billions of dollars. And I don't have any advice for anybody running a business, except when you find out something is leading to bad results or bad behavior, if you're in the top job, you've got to take action fast. And that's why we have hotlines. That's why when we get certain anonymous letters, we turn them over to the audit committee or to outside investigators, and I will guarantee you that we will have some people who do things that are wrong at Berkshire in the next year, 5 years, 10 years, and 50 years. You cannot have 390,000 people. And it's the one thing that always worries me about my job, because I've got to hear about those things and I've got to do something about them. when I do hear about them. Charlie?
Well, I don't think people ought to go to jail for honest errors of judgment. It's bad enough to lose your job. And I don't think that any of those top officers was deliberately malevolent in any way. We're talking about honest errors in judgment. And I don't think Tim Sloan even committed honest errors of misjudgment. I just think he was an accidental casualty that didn't deserve the trouble.
Yeah,
I wish this Tim Sloan was still there.
yeah, there's no evidence that he did a thing, but he stepped up to take a job that where he was going to be a pinata, basically, for all kinds of investigations, and rightfully Wells should be checked out on everything they do. All banks should. I mean, they get a government guarantee, and they receive trillions of dollars in deposits, and they do that basically because of the FDIC, and if they abuse that, they should pay a price. And if anybody does anything like a Paul Moser did, for example, of Solomon, they ought to go to jail. Paul Moser only went to jail for 4 months, but if you're breaking laws, you should be prosecuted on it. If you do a lot of dumb things, I wish they wouldn't go away. The CEOs wouldn't go away so rich under those circumstances. But people will do dumb things. I actually proposed. I think it may have been on one of the annual reports even. I proposed that if a bank gets to where it needs government assistance, that basically the responsible CEO should lose his net worth and his spouse's net worth if he doesn't want the job under those circumstances. And I think that the directors, I think they should come after the directors for the last 5 years. I think I proposed of everything they've received. But it's the shareholders who pay. I mean, if we own 9% of Wells, whatever this has cost, 9% of it is being borne by us, and it's very hard to tie it directly. One thing you should know, incidentally, though, is that the FDIC, which was started, I think it was started January 1st, 1934, but it was a New Deal proposal, and the FDIC has not cost the United States government a penny. It now has about $100 billion in it, and that money has all been put in there by the banks, and that's covered all the losses of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of financial institutions. And I think the impression is that the government guarantees saved the banks, but the government money did not save the banks. The banks' money as an industry not only has paid every loss, but they've accumulated an extra $100 billion, and that's the reason the FDIC assessments now are going back down. They had them at a high level, and they had a higher level for the very big banks. So when you hear all the political talk about the banks, they had not cost the federal government a penny. There were a lot of actions that took place that should not have taken place. And there's a lot fewer now, I think, than there were in the period leading up to 2008 and 9. But some banks will make big mistakes in the future. Charlie?
I've got nothing to add to that.
Okay. Jay Gelb from Barclays. Barclays just had a proxy contest of sorts, didn't they?
That's right, Warren. I also have a question on Berkshire Hathaway. I'm sorry, on share buybacks. Warren, in a recent Financial Times article, you were quoted as saying that the time may come when the company buys back as much as $100 billion of its shares, which equates to around 20% of Berkshire's current market cap. How did you arrive at that $100 billion figure, and over what time frame would you expect this to occur?
Yeah. I probably arrived at that $100 billion figure in about 3 seconds when I got asked the question. It was a nice round figure, and we could do it. and we would like to do it if the stock was, we've got the money to buy in $100 billion worth of stock. And bear in mind, if we were buying in 100 billion stock, it probably would be that the company wasn't selling at 500 billion, so it might buy well over 20%. We will spend a lot of money. We've been involved in companies where the number of shares has been reduced 70 or 80% over time, we like the idea of buying shares at a discount. We do feel if shareholders, if we're going to be repurchasing shares from shareholders who are partners, and we think it's cheap, we ought to be very sure that they have the facts available to evaluate what they own. I mean, just as if we had a partnership. It would not be good if there were 3 partners and 2 of them decided that they would sort of freeze out the third, maybe in terms of giving them material information that they knew that third party didn't know. So it's very important that our disclosure be the same sort of disclosure that I would give to my sisters who were the imaginary, they're not imaginary, but they're the shareholders to whom I address the annual report every year, because I do feel that if you're going to sell your stock, you should have the same information that's important that's available to me and to Charlie. But we will, if our stock gets cheap relative to intrinsic value, we would not hesitate. We wouldn't be able to buy that much in a very short period of time in all likelihood, but we would certainly be willing to spend $100 billion. Charlie?
I think when it gets really obvious, we'll be very good at it.
Let me get that straight. What did you say exactly?
When it gets really obvious, we'll be very good at it.
Yeah. I was hoping that's what you said. Yeah, we will be good at it. But we don't have any trouble being decisive. We don't do it. We don't say yes very often. But if we something obvious, I mean, if you and I are partners, and our business is worth $1 million, and you say you'll sell your half to me for $300,000, you'll have your $300,000 very quickly. Okay, station 2.
Outside of Berkshire Hathaway, what is the most interesting or fun personal investment you have ever made?
Well, they're always more fun when you make a lot of money off of them. Well, one time I bought 1 share of stock in the Atled Corp. That's spelled A-T-L-E-D. And Atled had 98 shares outstanding, and I bought 1. And not what you call a liquid security. And Atled happened to be the word Delta spelled backwards. And 100 guys in St. Louis had each chipped in $50 or $100 or something to form a duck club in Louisiana, and they bought some land down there. 2 guys didn't come up with it. There were 100 of them. 2 of them defaulted on their obligation to come up with $100. So there were 98 shares out, and they went down to Louisiana, and they shot some ducks, but apparently somebody fired a few shots into the ground, and oil spurted out, and those Delta Duck Club shares, and I think the Delta Duck Club field is still producing. I bought stock in it 40 years ago for $29,200 a share, and it had that amount in cash, and it was producing a lot, and they sold it. If they kept it, that stock might have been worth $2 or $3 million a share, but they sold out to another oil company. But that was certainly that was the most interesting thing. Actually, I didn't have any cash at the time, and I went down and borrowed the money, and I bought it for my wife, and I borrowed the money, and And the loan officer said, would you like to borrow some money to buy a shotgun as well? Charlie, tell them about the one you missed.
Well, I have two investments that come to mind. When I was young and poor, I spent $1,000 once buying an oil royalty that paid me $100,000 a year for a great many years. But I only did that once in a lifetime. On a later occasion, I bought a few shares of Elridge Oil, which went up 30 times rather quickly. But I turned down 5 times as much as I bought. It was the dumbest decision of my whole life. So if any of you have made any dumb decisions, look up here and feel good about yourselves.
Yeah.